And my apologies, leader of the third party.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to the Minister for all the questions already answered. I've been trying to tune in when possible, but I've missed large portions of it, so I apologize in advance for repetition. I won't be quite as effective a verbal jousting partner, perhaps, as my opposition colleagues, but I'll try. Appreciate the opportunity to ask some questions. I'll start with electricity because it's, I believe it's our way out of this climate mess, and then unfortunately we'll have to move on to fossil fuels. But that's the order of my priorities. To start, BC Hydro's most recent integrated resource plan lays out a plan to meet electricity demands in the coming decades with consideration for electrification of the whole economy. Plan confirms the need for new sources of cleaner renewable energy in the province sooner than previously anticipated. What is the province's plan to make up this shortfall?
Minister.
Well, thank you, and thanks to the leader of the Green Party for the question. Welcome to the debate. I think this debate represents such an important opportunity for the province, electrification, what it means for jobs, what it means for climate change, what it means for communities, what it means for First Nations people, and what it means for economic development in other industries as well, which is significant. And so with respect to our integrated resource plan and what we're doing, a lot of our capital plan, our capital investment, BC Hydro, is to ensure the distribution of electricity. So some of it is in communities that are urban communities. The need to address, if the member has recently been to Brentwood and Burnaby, you'll know the extraordinary development in that neighborhood, a number of new people living there, the 540,000 new people that came and got MSP numbers in BC during my final 3 years as Minister of Health, for example. So there's a huge demand for that. That was mitigated over time a little bit by some declines in industrial demand that started in the 2000s and went forward from there. Some of them to do with some major forest industry, which are major users of electricity. And so I believe that this is the time when we have to advance renewable energy projects in BC. And so last year, my predecessor, the now Minister of Health, announced the call for power that had been led into it by a one-year process to seek renewable electricity. And I think the results of that were extremely positive for the province. 9 wind projects, the average levelized price 45% below a similar call of power in 2009. So inexpensive, and of course, all the projects but one, the 9 wind and 1 solar project, 9 of them 51% First Nations owned, 1 49% First Nations owned. We put a minimum of 25%. I think it showed how effective the process were. Clean, low-cost energy and projects around the province. Member will know I won't get into this debate because it's coming in the legislature, but I also believe that projects need to be built. That we need to, part of dealing with climate change is building an alternative economy, and that means building projects like wind projects in BC and getting them done and getting the turbines turning and so on. It's our intention to follow up with that call for power. It had been initially thought that we would go 24, 26, 28, but I think the demand is there, and I think we should be more ambitious with that. So there will be renewed calls for power for energy, but also a desire to look at our options in terms of firm power, of which there's also a number of renewable options. Earlier in the debate, we excluded in that process nuclear power as an option, but there are very significant options for the province. Think of geothermal, battery technologies. You can think, of course, of hydro as well. So all of those are significant opportunities. We further have to also explore, because sometimes it's the cheapest power is the power we don't use. is further investments in conservation, which also help individuals who are dealing with profound affordability issues right now to avoid major costs in energy. BC Hydro is already a low-cost provider. With the recent increases, will be 12% below the rate of inflation since 2017, the third largest, lowest electricity rates in North America. But providing people with an opportunity to save money also builds the economy, also deals with issues of affordability, also builds support for climate change, and is part of any serious electricity plan. So those are some of the things we're looking at now. In addition to that, BC Hydro has some things that it can do to address this, including the sixth unit at Revelstoke, which would also increase the capacity of the hydro system. And that project is in process now, but is an important process as well. So BC Hydro, First Nations, and then finally the distribution of that electricity to regions of the province that have inadequate access now for economic development. That includes the Northwest, the North Coast Transmission Line. And so all of those things coming together to build economic development. I'll just say this finally, I'm very proud of the First Nations involvement in the renewable projects. But for a reason that sometimes people don't think of, frequently major projects get built by major corporations that are not centered in BC. We're talking about projects majority owned by the communities where they're situated. And that is exciting for economic development and the creation of wealth in regions of BC.
Recognizing the leader of the third party.
Thank you to the minister. I take the point on public power. I'm relying a bit on my observations as a lay person over the last 10 or 15 years, but my impression is that there were some lost years at BC Hydro in terms of bringing on new capacity. 2005, I believe, was the last call until this past fall. It seems like there, although I said it was, we need the energy sooner than previously anticipated, it seems like there was a miscalculation in terms of what new capacity would be expected, and I believe that probably a lot of resources were brought into Site C, but can the minister say what structural changes have been made at BC Hydro to make sure that that kind of lack of forecasting won't happen again in the future, as we know that we're changing quickly on electrification, and we may find that no matter what we do, we've underestimated what power we need.
Thank you. Recognizing the minister.
Yeah, thank you. And so there have been a number of periods, as the member will know. There was significant IPP development in the early noughts. I would argue not especially successful or effective for BC Hydro in the way that the calls were undertaken. And I've written about this elsewhere. I'll share that information with him, but I don't think he needs a full history of that time. The last call was 2009, not 2005. But nonetheless, that's a significant thing. In the meantime, BC Hydro, which had relatively flat, and I'm happy to share this information with a member, relatively fat power demands over time, undertook the Site C project, which adds 8%, and is obviously a very valuable project in terms of the capacity it brings to BC Hydro's system. I think it's significant and in place. And that was undertaken, to be clear, under the previous government. It was reviewed under our government in 2017. We decided to proceed with the project and finish the project. The initial price was $8.335 billion. The final price was $16 billion. So it increased in price, as capital projects have over that time. But we could, again, have a discussion on the Site C project. It's not important, but it does fill a gap. Over that period, there was relatively flat demand. Why? Because while we saw an increase in residential demand, we didn't see the same increases in industrial demand, and they tended to cancel themselves out a little bit. We've seen in recent years dramatic increases and we see this not just in energy, but in healthcare and education, everything else, dramatic increase in population that has occurred over time, right? And that creates substantially new residential demand. So BC Hydro continues. We have a BC Hydro system. They and Fortis have systems that are regulated by a public regulator, the BC Utilities Commission, that does a very good job. So it's actually not all publicly owned power energy companies have that system in place, but we do in BC. It's kind of a unique system. There's the CEO and the chair of the BC Utilities Commission is Dr. Mark Jackard, who has a lot of experience in these areas, not just in utilities regulation, but on issues of climate change and everything else. And he's well known. He's actually significantly, I think, improved efficiency at the Utilities Commission. He deserves a lot of credit for that, and he's obviously very active and thoughtful participant in those debates. So when BC Hydro submits its plans to the Utilities Commission, including its detailed plans around projects like the wind projects, that is a process that doesn't occur everywhere. Doesn't mean we can't be wrong, but what I am saying to the member is we are being more, and BC Hydro is being, in these processes, more aggressive. Historically, they would wait for the demand for projects before engaging in a process like the North Coast Transmission Line. We think there's a strong case to be made that the energy demand is coming in critical minerals and other things, that we should address it now so as not to be too late to get there, to take advantage of the economic opportunities that the member in the legislature is supporting, as are we.
Recognizing the leader of the third party.
Thank you. Appreciate the update on the Site C cost. Can the minister tell us whether the final tally is in on Site C and what it is, and if it is that figure 16 billion quoted, or is there further update to come on the cost of Site C?
Recognizing the minister.
I think that will be the cost. Of course, we're not finished exactly, so it's still estimated cost, but there will be a final project report submitted to the BCUC by BC Hydro when it's fully operational, and that will be publicly available, and it will be the responsibility of the BCUC, as it is with all such reports, to review that report at that time.
Recognizing the leader of the third party.
Thank you. Note the mention of the North Coast Transmission Line, and I listened with interest to some of the earlier discussion, but I missed part of it. So I heard critical minerals. Can the minister tell me who are expected to be the principal customers for North Coast Transmission Line energy?
Recognizing
the minister.
Well, first and foremost, the residents of the Northwest. I think it's fair to say I don't think we have. I think representatives of the region maybe in other houses, but I think they would tell you that residential service is sometimes not always what it should be. We have the demand on transmission in the region is significant, but there is a significant number of mining projects in the Northwest. Of course, there's increase in demand, for example, from the Cedar LNG project, which will be and would be in place before the construction of this line. So it's not, one follows the other. And there's very significant economic development in and around the Port of Prince Rupert and then into the region in mining critical minerals projects. And without this transmission line, really, the only alternative, I suppose, to doing it, and it would be contrary to our policy, would be some form of gas-fired generation to support energy demand there. But we believe there's a better approach, and that is twinning our transmission line, working with First Nations to do it, and that's what we're doing, which is bringing clean electricity from the north to the north.
Recognizing the leader of the third party.
Thank you for that. That's helpful. Given the differential in rate for industrial customers versus residential, is it fair to say that residential ratepayers will be subsidizing industrial consumers when, for the energy brought by the North Coast transmission line.
Recognizing the minister.
Well, to start with, we have extremely low electricity rates in BC. And why is this? Because we've got public power, which, because the only two that compete with us are Manitoba Hydro and Quebec Hydro, public power. Now, Quebec Hydro is doing what we're doing, which is a massive investment in clean electricity. And we're doing the same thing. And you see that reflected in BC's Hydro's capital plan, and you see that reflected in the announcements we've made on calls for power and the ones that I expect we'll be making in the future. All of the incremental power costs more than the heritage power. By definition, it's just true. It's true of Site C as well. You build new resources, and then you pay for them over time. They're going to cost more than the heritage resources. One of the reasons why overall energy prices are pretty stable in BC and below the rate of inflation, at least under this government. And you know, I'm hesitant to criticize the BC Liberal government, but 54% above the rate of inflation in hydro rates in their time, 12% below the rate of inflation in the current government's time. And I know I'll have support on that side of the house for that, so that'll be good. But but what is also true is if you build out new capacity, and that's true of wind projects, that's true of Site C, that's true of building out transmission capacity, which we have to do. I mean, if you've got hundreds of thousands more people, you've got to bring distribution and transmission capacity to get the power to those people, and that will cost more, and that capital cost is ultimately borne in a utility system by the ratepayer. So so if you look at the $36 billion capital plan by BC Hydro, the majority of the spending is that kind of spending. It's new power stations in Burnaby and in Surrey and in communities around the province that are paid for ultimately by the ratepayer. And because they're new and they're new costs, they will have an upward pressure on hydro rates, just like building new transmission capacity in the Northwest does. And building new transmission capacity in the Northwest might be paid for by people in the Lower Mainland, but so is building a new substation in Brentwood, for example. So that's meeting the demands of the economy everywhere. We have different industrial and commercial and residential rates, and all of those rate increases are reviewed in normal practice by the Utilities Commission. In the current practice, as you know, we gave a direction for 3.75 rate increases because it's going to be an extremely busy period, the Utilities Commission, but the next round will be regulated by the Utilities Commission, as will such projects such as the North Coast Transmission Line, regulated by the Utilities Commission, to ensure that they meet the proper standard, and that if there are rate increases, they're properly ascribed in the process. So having that Utilities Commission process ensures not that there won't ever be any rate increases, because if we're building things, by definition, we'll have to pay for them, like Site C, like the North Coast Transmission Line. But that having a Utilities Commission process and a public utility this as outstanding as BC Hydro will benefit everyone and ensure everyone's treated fairly.
Recognizing the leader of the third party, and a reminder to please direct comments via the chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to move towards oil and gas. I apologize through the chair that I may jump back to electricity at some point, but I'm new at this, so I'm going to try to group my questions. But so the net zero by 2030 policy, and understanding that there's recent advice clarifying to net zero ready for certain portions, but how does this net zero by 2030 policy ensure that LNG project proponents prioritize on-site emissions reduction over offsetting in alignment with the mitigation hierarchy rather than over-relying on carbon offsets as seen in the Silicim's LNG proposal.
Recognizing the minister.
So maybe I'll just start with the member by going through the policy, and then we can follow up with other parts of it. And really, policy is that new large industrial facilities with estimated annual emissions greater than 10,000 tons carbon dioxide equivalent that have not already received an environmental assessment certificate. Right? So we know how that applies to LNG projects. One significant project, well, two significant projects. One that's though not decided or not received its decision to go forward, LNG 2 or LNG Canada 2. That's already approved in these processes. But those projects that have not yet already received an environmental assessment certificate must develop a credible plan to achieve net zero emissions in the required time frame. That's 2030 for LNG and 2050 for all other new industry. Demonstrate that emissions will be reduced as far as reasonably practicable during facility design and during the lifetime of the project. Review and update the plan every 5 years to consider new technologies, and demonstrate how, for emissions not eliminated through reductions, the proponent will offset the remainder of the facility's emissions through offset units under the Greenhouse Gas Industrial Reporting and Control Act, operating in and beyond the applicable net zero time frame. So I think the member's asking, and so all of that is to lay the foundation so we don't repeat what the policy is. The policy is in place in such a way that they have to have a credible plan, right? They have to be ready to go forward. If the clarification that occurred that has received some attention merely states that if the electricity isn't there at that time, they have to have a plan in place. They have to be ready to take it on so that they're ready to go when it gets there. And that's really the only distinction between what the policy was and is. And I think the member understands that, but I want to go through it just to lay the foundation for perhaps other answers.
Recognizing the leader of the third party.
Okay, yes, I do. I thank you, but I do understand the distinction. Thank you to the minister for that. I'm focused on offsets, and given the concerns around the offsetting program, including issues of additionality, permanence, and verifiability, how does the government plan to regulate and verify offsets to prevent double counting and ensure credibility in meeting those net zero targets?
Recognizing the minister.
So our offsets are third-party verified, first of all. We have the most stringent requirements in the world. And so to ensure it represents additionality, which is an important principle. And so so I think in that respect, the process that are established in BC are highly respected around the world doesn't imply that there isn't concerns about projects and other issues, of course not. But with respect to that issue, third-party regulated, verified, additionality, and stringent requirements.
Recognizing the leader of the third party.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Larger issue, but I'm interested in the minister's take on it. Most of the emissions associated with, first of all, I appreciate the attempt to get to net zero by 2030 or net zero ready, and recognize that that is within the plant, the export plant itself and liquefying process. As we know, most of the emissions associated with the supply and the upstream and downstream supply of the gas. So given that the terminal is only a small part of overall emissions, what confidence do we have that the net zero policy will help address pressures on our BC climate targets? I will leave the downstream discussion since it's offshore outside of Canadian borders, but the question for the minister is, should the upstream portion of this process, fracking and distribution, not be included in this net zero planning requirement?
Recognizing the minister.
Well, first of all, I just noted in the answer to the first question, 2050, we have a net zero requirement at that time. So that's important. Existing plants, of course, have to deal with the methane rules if he's talking about oil and gas, which are significant, as well as the output-based pricing system, which BC is supporting, continuing to have in place. So in terms of brand new facilities that are not LNG, which is 2030, they're brand new facilities of all kinds meeting the threshold will require the net zero plan.
Recognizing the leader of the third party.
I'm focused on LNG because, at least according to this, the information I have, operational upstream emissions for all 6 of the proposed LNG projects would make up 40% of our 2030 emissions target, leaving 60%, of course, for the entire rest of the economy. To be consistent with the BC government's net zero new industry intentions paper, I would expect that the Silicim's application would not be approved until the terminal project's net zero plan has been deemed credible by the Climate Action Secretariat. Can the minister confirm that that is the case?
Recognizing the minister.
Yes, and it would be the Climate Action Secretariat doing the work. That would be the minister's decision.
Recognizing the leader of the third
Madam
party.
Chair, thank you. Again, on Silicim's, the project, the construction and commissioning are excluded emissions from the net zero commitments. Does the government have a plan to require LNG projects to account for all emissions, including those from construction, to align with net zero by 2030 policies? And I'll note that flaring during commissioning is a very large proportion of the carbon emissions, and is a very large exemption.
Recognizing the minister.
And just generally speaking, I don't like to do this, but that's a project that's in an environmental assessment. So those issues could be, I'm not saying they will be, because that particular process is independent of me, but what's decided, but those issues could be addressed in the environmental assessment process, which is obviously a different minister, but I didn't want to give, just talk to the Minister of Environment answers, so that's basically where it's at.
Recognizing the leader of the third party.
Solismus includes a non-binding oversight committee for its net zero plan, and there are no consequences if the proponent ignores the committee's recommendations. How does the government intend to ensure robust binding oversight mechanisms that hold project proponents accountable for implementing and updating mitigation measures in line with emerging technologies and stricter standards?
Recognizing the minister.
Again, remember the EA conditions are legally binding.
Recognizing the leader of the third party.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Prince Rupert Gas Transmission Line was excluded from Solistum's mitigation planning. The BAT/BEP assessment and net zero planning. These gaps mean that opportunities to address PRGT's climate impacts are being ignored. Will the province update the PRGT application to reflect this?
Recognizing the minister.
Well, and obviously these are processes that are before regulators now. A member will know that PRGT has its environmental assessment certificate, and it's in a process to review whether the project has had a substantial start. And that process is before the environmental assessment process now, if the member understands that is an answer to his question.
Recognizing the leader of the third party.
Mentioned output-based pricing system. Can the minister provide a status update of the complete implementation of the OBPS for large industrial polluters?
Recognizing the minister.
So it's fully implemented for all existing industries, and they're in the process of reporting on their emissions in production.
Recognizing the leader of the third party.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to go back to offsets because I'm jumping around, and we are a small caucus and a small team, and not everything goes according to plan. The uncertainty of the availability of verified offsets presents a challenge for net zero pledges. In 2021, we had 1.1 megatons of CO2 equivalent from BC forest management projects verified in the entire province. Solicitums, for example, would require 21% of that amount every year, starting in 2028, to be net zero, even with connection to the grid. Never mind the competition with other parties also seeking to offset their impacts. Does the province have a plan to rapidly expand the scale of verified carbon offsetting projects in BC?
Recognizing the minister.
We were just having a discussion about interfering in markets, but anyway, the short answer is yes. We work closely with the federal government on this and adopt their requirement. That's requirements and their approach. That's the most efficient way to do it. In addition to that, there's a belief in markets here, and that there's a market being created here, and we believe that as that market is created and demand increases, that there will be opportunities in BC for that. That said, the decisions on this project, which is of course not approved at present in the process, the financial decisions that a company would make would be their decisions. They'd have to assess that. But in terms of building out the carbon credit market, yes. Working with the federal government on that, yes. We believe that market demand will drive that, drive opportunities there, absolutely.
Recognizing the leader of the third party.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Trying to move back towards solutions, and interested in learning a little bit about hydrogen. So my couple of questions. What is the ministry's plan for the rollout of hydrogen fueling infrastructure in fleets as a solution to increase accessibility and affordability for clean transportation?
Recognizing the minister.
So, thank you. Maybe to start, because this is direct funding from the past year. $8.2 million was provided in funding for 8 hydrogen fueling stations in 2024. 6 are operational, 2 are being built. So that's a building out of capacity. In addition to that, we talked, and I'm going to share with the honourable member, I won't use up his time with this, 20 projects that we're working on now with private and public sector proponents. In addition, of course, BC has a hydrogen strategy that is, involves 63 actions to be taken in the short term, and we'll absolutely share that and what I might offer to the member, and depending on what he wants to do in follow-up, but we're going to absolutely offer to the member with the ministry and with BC Hydro a full briefing on the hydrogen plan, where it's at. Because in some cases it hasn't moved forward as quickly as possible. That's just the case with all new advancements. It sometimes take a while, but the investment we believe will be fruitful for the BC, both in economic development, but also in building out a network that will support hydrogen as a fuel source.
Recognizing the leader of the third party.
Thank you. I think the minister's anticipated my next question, which is that the hydrogen strategy is 2021, so 4 years old now. And so it would be really appreciated to get an update on the status of it. I did have the benefit of visiting some local hydrogen focused businesses 3 or 4 weeks ago in and around Burnaby and North Vancouver, and I did hear about how can I say maybe a softening of support for hydrogen innovation, and I'm wondering whether there's anything, as the minister mentioned, that not everything moves as quickly as we would like, but is there any hesitation from the ministry over hydrogen as a potential fuel, particularly for transportation?
Recognizing the minister.
Maybe I'll just describe some of the actions that have been taken. I'd say in the on the last question that progress doesn't always go in a straight line. The potential here is significant, both for the economy and the climate. And a lot of the innovation is by, of course, post-secondary institutions and by private corporations, but there's a significant role, and I'm very appreciative of the work my immediate colleagues have done on this file. Just to give you a sense of some of the key actions since the strategy release, this is the partnering with the BC Centre for Innovation and Clean Energy to publish the BC Hydrogen Regulatory Mapping Study, providing support for the City of Prince George to develop a central BC hydrogen hub, expanding the BC Energy Regulator's mandate. This is going to be a theme for the week, I think, to include regulations of hydrogen, ammonia, and methanol production, and standing up the Clean Energy and Major Projects Office to accelerate the development of clean energy projects. The hydrogen sector has received support from various government programs. BC provided more than $48 million in support for the hydrogen sector since the release of the hydrogen strategy until the end of this past fiscal year, so until March 31, 2025. And in addition, the Low Carbon Fuel Standard Initiative Agreement program offers support to low carbon fuel projects independent of public tax dollars and does not provide direct financial subsidies. Instead, that program issues compliance credits, which hold a fluctuating monetary value in the LCFS or the FSS or the Low Carbon Fuel Standard Credit Market. The number of credits allocated to an agreement does not have a guaranteed value, but project proponents assume all risks associated with credit price changes. The IA program currently supports 7 hydrogen projects. So all of that is some of the high-level summary of what's happened under the strategy. There's more detail. I'll be happy to share it with the honourable member. And yes, I believe that this will be a benefit to BC, and the benefit is not immediate. It's always was and always will be in the sort of medium term, but I think it's absolutely worth proceeding on.
Recognizing the leader of the third party.
Thank you. I'm going to move back to oil and gas royalties for a moment. I notice in the budget document between fiscal year 24-25 all the way to 26-27, so two years the natural gas royalties double. In 2022, the government announced plans for a new oil and gas royalty system with the intention of economic development receiving a fair return on our natural resources and environmental protection. The program is set to take effect on January 1st, 2027. Can the minister please provide an update on this new system for oil and gas royalties?
Recognizing the minister.
So what I'll suggest as well, I'll share a document that takes you through the expected timelines. So I won't talk too much about this. The key changes to the royalty system, as a member will know, is a revenue minus cost approach with a capital recovery mechanism that uses actual costs, which is a significant change. Setting reference price so that it captures more of the commodity's value, removing incentives to increase production that were based in a time when gas was expected to be scarce, and reevaluating the royalty rates so that revenues are maximized and there's a minimum that all producers have to pay. The result, we believe, will be that government achieves a fair share of royalties from petroleum and natural gas resources while treating companies fairly. Interestingly, in terms of the prospective years and then the past years, earlier I got a question of why the past years have gone down. And so now I'm getting a question why the future years are going up, and I just say that is in the nature of parliamentary debate.
Recognizing the leader of the third party.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In May 2022, the province announced Healing the Land and Emissions Reduction Program as a response to the results of deep well credits and to encourage investment in land restoration in the Northeast. Programs targeted for implementation in 2025. Can the minister provide a status update on the progress of this program? Can they confirm if any money has been collected for the intention of healing the land in the Northeast so we can begin reversing the environmental degradation caused by deep well drilling?
Recognizing the minister.
So the HEALER program hasn't been stood up yet. We're working very closely, in particular, on these issues of restoration, which are fundamental, I think, in the region, with the industry, but in particular with Treaty 8 First Nations. These are this is an important initiative for all. What we want to make sure is where we arrive at will lead to restoration on the land. That's the most important thing. So that particular program hasn't been stood up yet. Obviously, there's work being done on restoration. We believe there needs to be more, and I believe so does the industry, and I certainly know Treaty 8 First Nations believe that, and so we're actively involved, including assigning Assistant Deputy Minister Viva Wolf and others to these issues and others, and I intend as well to be actively involved in this issue because we need more restoration of the land, and it is in some ways a requirement for activity and maybe increases in activity that are reflected in what the member cited from the budget, but also essential for the future of the region and for the economic development of the region. Most of the Treaty 8 First Nations, if not all, have their own their own companies that deal with issues of restoration, which means that those projects are very positive expressions for First Nations as well of economic development. They have a very sophisticated understanding of the issues, and we're working closely with them and with the industry to make sure that we're on the right place on this and we see improvements in restoration.
Recognizing the leader of the third party.
Thank you. I'm just going to focus on methane, fugitive methane for a moment. Appreciate that this report was tabled today. Thank you to the minister for that. And I haven't been through it enough of a fine-tooth comb to get into the methane piece, but obviously, province made a commitment to reduce greenhouse GHG emissions from the oil and gas sector by 33 to 38% by 2030, and this includes a 75% reduction of methane emissions from 2014 to 2030, and the near elimination of methane emissions by 2025. Notwithstanding all the other emissions, methane to me seems one of the most tragic because it doesn't benefit anybody. Can the minister provide a status on this emissions cap, and does the minister foresee us reaching this target?
Recognizing the minister.
So to date, the progress has been really important. 43% reduction since 2015, and that's a real achievement for everyone, including and I suppose especially by the industry. We believe that we can meet our targets, and we'll meet our 2030 targets in this respect. We'll be greatly assisted, I would say, by the federal government mirroring what we're doing. Right? I think that's true in lots of areas. That the federal government and an active federal government, which itself is driving economic development, the clean economy needs to be an important player here. It's very challenging for one jurisdiction in the country and in North America to take initiatives that aren't being taken everywhere. And so we've certainly advocated this with the federal government. I've met and spoken on this issue with my federal counterpart. Well, he was my federal counterpart, and he may be again, Minister Wilkinson. Engaged with Minister Guilbeault when he was the Minister of the Environment on this question. We, of course, increased and our regulation on January 1st, proceeded to do that. It's a significant action we've taken, and I agree with the member, but I also want to acknowledge the significant and positive role that industry has made in achieving what we've achieved so far, and obviously we'll be counting on them to help us achieve these goals as a province and hopefully as a country.
Recognizing the leader of the third party.
Thank you. That's encouraging that we stand a chance of meeting that 2030 goal. I wish it were true for all of our goals, but that's the work that's ahead of us. I just want to dig in a little bit to electrification, especially in the Northwest. Is it clear yet through the chair whether LNG Canada Phase 2 will be electrified in terms of, well, electrified, can the minister provide any new information on that?
Recognizing the minister.
Well, it's clear, but maybe not in the way that the member would like to see. LNG 2 is fully permitted, and fully permitted as gas-fired.
Recognizing the leader of the third party.
Okay, so yeah, the reason I asked the question is that to provide this electrical power to meet the net zero, well, to go from net zero ready to actually net zero, it would seem that we are removing power, we're removing capacity from potentially other industries in favor of LNG. So I'm trying to understand if there are any boundaries or guardrails to ensure that all this power that we've generated, by BC Hydro, by public power, doesn't get sucked up, so to speak, from a single industry when it could be benefiting potentially innovative or industries that are not fossil fuel driven. And so is there any mechanism to put boundaries on that so that this electricity can be used for, by British Columbians, not necessarily export based and benefit people within the province?
Recognizing the minister.
Well, economic development, for example, if we're talking about critical minerals, it may be that those critical minerals are developed for export, but that would also be very beneficial in terms of jobs and economic development in the province. So judging that, I would say this, that the net zero requirement does not apply to LNG Canada 2, we'll call that project that. It doesn't apply to it because it was permitted in advance of the net zero requirement being put in place. So that in some ways ensures that the electricity we produce is going to be distributed widely into different sectors, including LNG, but also the Port of Prince Rupert, also mining projects, also, frankly, residential customers who sometimes in the region don't get the service that I think they should get. So, and any number of other things that are being developed in the region. I think the transmission line is a single important thing. And it is important, and it is valuable. And there'll be a bit of a debate on this, but I'll just refer to the Cedar LNG project, which will be electrified, the lowest emission LNG in the world. And I think there's a whole debate, and there's like dozens of economic studies about the displacement of coal. I don't think you need to think about the displacement of coal. That's a debate, and there are very interesting views on all sides of that debate. But I think it's clear that the lowest emission LNG in the world does displace other LNG projects, and that our projects and our LNG being the lowest emission in the world and electrified, and projects like Cedar, which also is, of course, majority owned by a First Nation, who've done an exceptional job on that project. Whatever one thinks of LNG or the issue, the Haisla just done an extraordinary job on that project and getting it done, and getting it through, and now getting it under construction. So I think that has value too, and it's important too. But the member's quite right. I think we have to, as a province, assess what I call the allocation of resources. What he's talking about, we do in other areas. I'll give the member a very specific example that involves an action that was sustained in the courts by my predecessor, now Minister of Health, who's Minister of Energy, and around crypto mining, which could have potentially, for virtually no jobs, in a lineup system, used a huge amount of electricity resource. And I think one of the challenges at BC Hydro and for the province, and there are different jurisdictions that do this differently, and I apologize, we'll try and keep the answers shorter for the member, but say Quebec, right, which has a different allocation framework. That's something that absolutely the government of BC is looking at, not specifically as it relates to LNG, but just generally. How, if we're building incremental resources, do we ensure the maximum benefit to the province? And it seems to me that the maximum benefit to the province is probably not in some sort of first come, first served system necessarily, when you see a huge amount of demand into the future. And we certainly took that view with respect to crypto mining, and I think that view is widely supported on all sides of the House, including, if I recall correctly, by members of the previous members of the BC Green Party in the House. So I think there are options to do that. It is something that we're under active consideration about how we best do this in this time when the potential economic development is so great for electricity, where we're obviously building more electricity, but to ensure that with our public 100% owned Crown Corporation, BC Hydro, we get the maximum benefit of that.
Recognizing the leader of the third party.
Thank you. Go back to LNG 1, 2, and wood fiber already permitted in a second. I'm wondering, there has been, as the minister will know, a lot of speculation about potential subsidies to this industry, and I've seen quite a bit of speculation that wood fiber in particular is being charged at even a lower rate than the industrial rate for electricity. Can the minister disclose what wood fiber will be paying for electricity from BC Hydro.
Recognizing the minister.
They're going to be, to the member, they're going to be charged a standard industrial rate.
Recognizing the House Leader of the third party.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through the chair, what LNG expansion is baked into the revenue forecast for the next 3 years? So you mentioned LNG 2 is permitted. We've talked about cedar, we've talked about wood fiber, what LNG expansion beyond what is currently in operation is baked into the revenue forecast for the next 3 years, and how much is that revenue amount?
Recognizing the minister.
Well, two things. I'd say to the honourable member that there's nothing I hate more doing than saying that that's a question for the Minister of Finance. So, but it's kind of a question for the Minister of Finance. But I'd say that if you're looking at the next 3 years of the fiscal plan, only LNG 2, which hasn't, remember, they have not made a decision to proceed even. That wouldn't be necessarily a revenue-producing project even in the next 3 years. So if you think of where these projects are, I think it's very unlikely they'd be quote, baked into anything. But I'm sure that the member might engage on the projections of the Minister of Finance with our outstanding Minister of Finance.
Recognizing the House Leader of the third party.
Madam Chair, to the Minister, what studies do you rely on to take the view that LNG has already market in Asia and that it will displace coal?
Recognizing the minister.
Well, I said quite the opposite. I said the displacement of coal is not a primary consideration. I just noted that there was a public debate about the displacement of coal. I didn't suggest I was making that case, and I'm not making that case. The case I made was that when you have a low-emission LNG project, like the ones we have in BC, lowest emission LNG in the world, that there is a potential to displace other LNG projects, which I think is a reasonable argument. If you assume that there's a market of a certain size, you're displacing those projects that might have a positive effect. It's unlikely to be used to achieve climate targets, but there's no question it has an effect on the actual climate when you displace a dirtier project with a cleaner project. So that's what I was saying with respect to coal. With respect to the future of the LNG market, there are, I could also provide the member, because I read, it shows where my life is at these days. I read lots of projections about the LNG market in the world, right? But I would assume that if you're talking about investments of tens of billions of dollars, the people making those investments, private sector investments, not investments by the government of British Columbia, that they would have insight into that question. There was one set of conclusions, as you know, in I think an IEA report, I'm thinking from last fall, which were more pessimistic than others, but depended on, for example, climate action in the United States, which, let's just say humbly, is no longer proceeding. So we'll see in that. But to a degree, it will be those are massive investment decisions by sophisticated, sometimes government-owned corporations around the world, and that I would assume that they are making assessments of that future market in their investment decisions. I read a lot of them. I read some that are bullish and others that are, whatever the opposite of bullish is, that's bearish. But I wouldn't want to speculate on all that. I just say that I have seen some that are quite pessimistic, but I assume the people making these investment decisions have seen them too.
Recognizing the leader of the third party.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to make sure I heard correctly. Is the minister not contending that that there is displacement of coal, but that the benefits of BC LNG are simply lower emissions LNG? Did I get that correct? I guess I was under the impression that we had a study suggesting that coal was being displaced by our LNG, but it sounds like maybe that's not the case.
Recognizing the minister.
No, what I'm saying is that there's a robust international debate about this question. And I'm interested in debate and I've read about the debate, but I'm not drawing a conclusion about that debate. And that's a debate overall about the displacement of coal by natural gas. As the member will know, coal production and coal generation, energy generation has gone up in recent years and will go up next year. So there may be displacement, but that is not, there may or may not be displacement. But I'm saying that is not central to my thinking as Minister of Energy. What I do note, the only thing I did note, was that there's clearly in the LNG market, unless you think it's inexhaustible in some ways, and I don't think that's the position of either of my two colleagues, but unless you think it's inexhaustible, that when you have a project, such as the Cedar LNG project, you compare it to this sort of notional and unusual and strange and uneconomic proposal around Alaska that's being made by the United States government right now. Our project is way less emissions and way better.
Recognizing the leader of the third party.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Does the ministry have its own study, or at least a BC-based study on this impact, either displacing coal or displacing higher emission LNG, or is it relying on the global conversation that the minister mentioned?
Recognizing the minister.
We don't have our own study, but there's lots of studies, fortunately. I don't think, though, that such a study independently commissioned in BC on the issues that I've raised would be a bad idea. I think it would be quite a good idea, because I think it would potentially, given the centrality of this question to the debates in our province, I think that would be a useful thing to have an independent group work on. I think that we could do some of that work within the ministry, but I think this is a case, given all the debates involved, where some independent review would be required as well. We've heard, and we'll hear from the industry on these questions, and of course from groups that are post-LNG as well, but having an independent review establishing baseline facts is something certainly that I would consider looking at very seriously.
Recognizing the leader of the third party.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I don't have it brought up in front of me. I believe the David Suzuki Foundation did a study of this, and so perhaps I appreciate the suggestion that an independent body would be best suited to parse through all that data. I have a bit of a broad question here, but I understand the philosophy of not moving the goalposts on industry and the effects that can have. So exempting LNG 1 and Canada 1, 2 and wood fiber from these net zero requirements. Given how quickly how quickly the climate is changing, how quickly climate science is changing, can the minister describe the risk in that would have been involved with including these projects after the fact, after sort of environmental certification? It seems like to me like we were late to the game on that and probably could have required that. But is it an impossibility or just too large a risk of maybe perhaps not getting a final investment decision on LNG Canada 2? What would be the main obstacles to going back and making those requirements for net zero?
Recognizing the minister.
Well, amongst other things, I would think very significant legal risk.
A reminder to the member and to all members that electronic devices must not be used when you have the floor.
Okay, can I just for my own edification clarify? I understood it was sort of reading questions off an electronic device if I'm consulting a document on a device.
No, that's not permitted.
Okay, we really are supporting the forestry industry then. I just anyway. Now going from
Recognizing the leader of the third party.
going from memory, looking at the service plan and acknowledging all the positive developments and plans for positive developments that are involved, the percentage of clean fuels forecast for year to year, I would say is somewhat underwhelming. 1% increase per year for the next 4 years. I'm wondering if the minister can comment on whether there's a possibility if these targets are artificially low, or if the amount of investment that we're talking about could potentially increase the percentage of clean fuel. We could.
Recognizing the minister.
Well, having worked on this issue a little bit, I would say our targets are quite ambitious, and they're having a real impact. You look at the emissions benefits, the low carbon fuel standard, and the economic benefits are really extraordinary. I think the targets are ambitious. It's our expectation we're going to continue it. We're going to work closely with industry because you want to make sure you have the capacity to deliver on them. But I think that's I think those targets are really important. I would say, and I don't know how long the member has, but if the member would like to do printouts and stuff, perhaps, if I may suggest, a short recess, and then we'll go the distance at the end. Would that be possible to get to that, or?
Recognizing the leader of the third party.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was supposed to have 2 hours, which would take us another 45 minutes. But the minister is so quick at responding to the questions. Previous experiences have been longer delay, so I'm almost ready to wrap up. If I think my colleague has one more, and if we can do that one more, and then I think I will yield my time or finish up.
Recognizing the House leader of the third party.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Over the course of the committee debate and discussion, we've discussed a variety of issues, and in various ways we have been guided in our policy approach on climate action by what other jurisdictions are doing or not doing. And the most recent example is the removal of the carbon tax because it was being removed in other jurisdictions in Canada. My question through the chair to the minister is it the policy of your government and your ministry that we will not undertake climate action that is more aggressive than other jurisdictions?
Recognizing the minister.
We want to lead other jurisdictions. I just say that through you, Honourable Chair, to the member on the methane regulations. We want to lead other jurisdictions, but surely it makes what we're doing stronger when we do. Surely if the federal government adopts our approach, for example, to methane emissions in oil and gas, that's a positive. It's a positive because it takes away a challenge to our competitiveness with other jurisdictions. So that's true. But it also means that our policies that we've led on in all kinds of areas, from the low carbon fuel standard policies to other policies, are adopted everywhere. I hesitate because of its origins to say we need to let all the flowers bloom. I won't give a number, but we need to lead on this. And so, and I believe we've done that in lots of areas in the past. The member will know that I proudly voted for Don Davies in the advanced poll in Vancouver Kingsway. And I think I'm very proud he got re-elected. But I also feel for climate action that a majority of members of Parliament who support climate action and might adopt our initiatives as we might adopt theirs is a positive thing. So I don't see it as we won't do it unless everyone else does it. I think we've got to lead. On the carbon tax, it was a significant issue, and the Premier made it clear before the election that we were going to get rid of the consumer-facing carbon tax should the federal government do the same. And the reason why that was important was that, of course, the federal government was imposing it anyway, right? So he was straightforward and clear about what the government would do, and we did it. And there is a robust debate on that question, and the member and I participated in that debate when the legislation was brought forward. But I'm hopeful, I believe, that BC can lead, and we need to lead. We're, 0.4% of the world's emissions. If it's just us, then it's not enough. And other countries I know do extraordinary things, and we should see what they're doing to build economic development. The province of Quebec and Hydro-Quebec, and I recommend to all honourable members, a recent speech by Michael Sabia of Hydro-Quebec, where they're building out, in partnership, by the way, with Newfoundland, in part, an extraordinary development of renewable electricity that counters, in many respects, the impact, the economic impact on Quebec of what Mr. Trump is doing. I think that's extraordinary. I read his speech and I'm inspired, and I want to do it too, and we are, right? And our Premier is leading on this question too. So I think we should lead and be inspired, and that's certainly how I feel.
Recognizing the leader of the third party.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm all finished. That leaves 40 minutes, and I don't know how I will yield that time either to another.
We have other participants. Independents are here.
Oh, right, we have independents. Well then, I thank you very much.